the piece that I wrote that's on iMixWhatILike.org and is a subject of a presentation. But and I do want to take some time to just go through this because I think it's extremely. I think what I'm trying to say here, is valuable beyond just a discussion of hip hop, and is something that just is misunderstood. So initially, and I'm going to sort of start backwards, but because initially, what was brought to my attention on Twitter the other day was someone was saying that that my argument or that I was missing the point, that because C. Delores Tucker is such a flawed character, that using her or seeming to come to her defense ruined the point of my argument. And I'm saying that actually has nothing to do with the argument I'm making. Her character, her politics, in many ways make my point. Her flaws in many ways make the point I'm trying to make. And essentially the broader summary is that her argument about corporations taking over rap and hip hop to the detriment of Black youth and the Black community is correct. And that in an attempt to defend hip hop, early journalists and writers, and then some of the biggest names in hip hop historiography have misrepresented, misquoted, truncated, I think inexcusably distorted her argument using her bad character to justify their own flawed narrative that hip hop has been a net positive to the condition materially and otherwise of Black people in this country, that it has been to the net positive in terms of the advancement civilizationally of this country, and has brought us into an advanced, more multicultural, more open world. And I'm saying that narrative is absolutely false and completely upside down. My argument, simply put, is that the cultural expression of a colonized, internally colonized population has been turned against that population, used to extract wealth, extract symbolism, extract potential political and otherwise power, turned it into billions of dollars for the most elite colonial states and companies, and been used to worsen or cover the worsening conditions of the very communities that have and still continue to be the largest progenitors of the art form. So I'm starting from the current material conditions of the communities, which are worse collectively than in the origins in the 70s, in the Bronx, et cetera, and so forth, to make the point that so many are saying is the opposite effect. So as I say, as I write in the piece, one reason for this imperfect person Tucker, one reason for this confusion, that is, was the imperfect person Tucker was. Perhaps there is truth to the claims of some that she was at one time a shady landlord, that she desired the limelight, and that her drive to her own ignoble ends led her to unfortunate alliances with members of the conservative elite, which erased the developed perception that she was attacking hip hop. I'm sorry, which eased the developed perception that she was attacking hip hop and Black youth. But these are not excuses for the treatment of her analysis, and has interestingly, paradoxically, led so many to support, tacitly or implicitly, even worse bedfellows. How else could it be that Tucker's correct analysis is dismissed based on perceived character flaws, while the personal shortcomings and worse of those who control the art are excused? Tucker's alliance, for instance, with the conservative culture vulture William Bennett, is lambasted, while hip-hop's subservient relationship to even more conservative, powerful, and exploitative companies is largely excused or even extolled. All right, so I'm going to come back to that. So I'm just starting off here by saying, say what you want about her, but when it comes to the issue of elite corporations negatively impacting and promoting particularly anti-Black, anti-woman, anti-community rap music, C. Delores Tucker was right. She was right then in the early 1990s when she more fully joined the fight against corporate dominance of Black art, and she would be even more right today, where just a few select companies, themselves subsidiaries of super conglomerates and international private equity holdings, have more control over the selection, promotion, and distribution, the creation of ultimate popular commercial form of rap music than at any other point in history. These companies assure that images which are pro-Black, politically radical, positive in their depiction of women, or that are simple, harmless fun, are largely kept from notoriety. All right, and I'm happy to at any point come back and discuss my argument as to how that works, or to highlight how that works. But simply put, anyway. Once the recording is recorded, it becomes the property of these companies, who can, through payment, place them, promote them, stream them, link them with other entities and artists, and make all forms of other forms either marginal or fully disappear. All right, so well, I want to get to the specifics of the Tucker point, but just very quickly. So I set up in this piece an attempt here to use 3 examples representing key moments in the rise of hip hop journalism and academia to simply introduce an unwitting complicity assisted how an unwitting complicity assisted the rise of a now dominant historical narrative, one that seeks to maintain a mythic, linear, and happy, positive move of hip hop, and by extension, Black people, from marginalization to mainstream national popular culture. So as I point out here, the works herein of Raquel Cepeda, Kierna Mayo, Jeff Chang, and Dan Charnas are representative of an attempt to replace early hip hop scholarship that did much to set a more appropriate and critical framework for interpreting the rise of hip hop. Earlier works for just a few instances, Trisha Rose, her later work notwithstanding, because that Hip Hop Wars book was I think really bad, and we can come back and maybe talk about that as well. But her early work was thrilling and incredibly, I think, important. Certainly Robin D.G. Kelly. Look at how I shout out my man Errol Henderson. Constantly shouting out my man Errol Henderson for his early work on rap music and Black nationalism. Constantly shouting him out. So yeah, it bothered me when my man makes reference to anyway doesn't do the same, doesn't reciprocate anyway. Errol, my man Errol, come on, man. And then Errol come back with some really confusing criticism of me. But anyway, my man, that work was fire. There's no denying it. And the work I'm criticizing absolutely has been meant to erase this work. And similarly from the late James Spady, who also similarly I really wish we had a chance to build on this. Unfortunately, when we met at a conference some years ago at Howard University, and his work, man, on street hip hop nation consciousness, street conscious, his work on hip hop is totally marginalized and absolutely essential. He did tighten me up on my approach to my work on John Henrik Clarke. And to put it mildly, I can't say politely, let me know that my monolingualism made it impossible for me to properly interpret the history of John Henrik Clarke, or his shall we say overblown role, according to Professor Spady, in the introduction of Check Enter Jup to African audiences here and elsewhere. And that we can't properly know the history of Jup, he put to me very clearly, because I don't read French and I don't read Arabic. I think it's a legit criticism. I just wish, as I tried to say to him that day, that we could have sat down and he could have taught me what I needed to know instead of condemning me for not knowing what I couldn't know. But anyway, but my point here is that even where these brothers, I feel like, didn't do me personally the way I should be, done, it's irrelevant. Their work is in this instance is essential. Again, I need a better word, a more powerful word than that. You cannot understand the history of hip hop or Black people if you are not familiar with some of that early work, some of which I've linked here, of Errol Henderson and particularly James Spady on this issue. And the point I'm getting at is that the work later on of Cepeda, Mayo, Chang, and Charnas is representative of the more dominant narrative that has been imposed, and where the misrepresentation of Tucker becomes essential in constructing that. So Tucker took her stance in the 1990s against what was then the still incomplete corporate takeover of rap music, and charged that such a trend would have increasingly harmful effects on Black people, youth in particular. She argued that rich white men were working to control and distort a potentially powerful and community-sustaining art form, turning it against the very Black communities from which it came. She was absolutely right. Today, the takeover is complete. At least in fewer corporations than ever control the commercial exchange of and wealth produced by rap music. The dominant narrative that hip hop has been this net positive to the condition of Black people in this country and to the country itself in terms of advancing it. Now, it has been a net positive to the country in advancing its own false narrative that it is the land of the free, democratic, moving past racism, blah, 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 blah. But in terms of actually advancing it beyond those traditions, no. The dominant narrative could be seen developing from the start. As the earliest hip hop literati put ink to paper or text to screen or text to screen with a goal of defending hip hop's right to exist, its heavy political, at least cultural content, unwittingly at best worked in some ways to scuttle the very revolutionary potential these first hip hop writers rightly claimed was there. So, and again, and I don't want to sound like the old guy, but if you weren't there or if you aren't familiar at least with this history, you have to remember that as rap music and hip hop culture emerges, it was not welcomed by anybody, including the Black bougie middle class that had come to take over the political apparatus, that had come to take over the media apparatus, the musical airwaves, the political discussion area. Hip hop was not welcomed. So a lot of folks were correct in saying and I remember feeling it. Defend it. This is the bad. Defend it. Absolutely. We have hip hop. Yeah. Defend it. Get out there. Fight. We have every right. It's not a fad. All that kind of stuff. Remember, it was saying it was a fad. Now, here's a question that I think is worthy of investigation. I just came to my mind. Would it have been a fad? Or what would you describe it had the commercial world not gotten involved and turned it into what it's become? Because from the very beginning, and this history is also misunderstood and misrepresented, Sylvia Robinson from the very beginning as a Black woman played a neo-colonial role in turning hip hop by falsely creating Sugar Hill Gang, by falsely creating the stolen raps and all that, and commercializing what was not commercial. She, for her own label purposes and selfish purposes, is one of the main conduits that helped this devolution. So I wonder maybe it should have been a fad, because its persistence has been it's been turned into a colonial form. I don't know. That's something I have to think about. That's interesting. Thought experiment for me, at least for the day. But if you don't understand, if to the extent we don't focus at least or remember or understand that in that early moment, that really that late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s moment of rap and hip hop not being accepted, of not being welcomed, then we miss some of the context here. So on that, even though I'm critical of what some of these early folks were writing, I understand, and certainly at that moment wanted them to defend it. And the early hip hop, Kalanji, and I'm not looking at the chat yet, but Kalanji had Hakeem Green on, Channel Live on, roll with KRS. I mean, they had one of the big, in a track, if I remember correctly, in a track that was positively shouting out, calling to say, saying Warner Electric, something, something, something. Why don't you, instead of mess with us, why don't you go free Mumia? So on the one hand, they were saying, free political prisoners, but on the other hand, they were saying Delores Tucker is teaming up with the anti-rap music hip hop world, and instead of picking on us and messing with us and the corporations, go free Mumia. Legit. Again, I'm not arguing that Tucker and Calvin Butts and them were radicals. I'm not advocating that at all. I'm not suggesting that they weren't on some personal this, personal that, whatever this, whatever that. What I'm saying is their argument about corporate dominance over rap music was correct. And Tucker's ultimate argument has, and I'll get to in a minute, has been distorted intentionally so that people could support ultimately this false narrative that hip hop has become this net positive. And to do that, one of the things that had to occur was it had to be defended, and it had to be, and critics of it had to be condemned as being anti-Black, anti-hip hop, anti-youth. So what resulted is the now dominant narrative of the victorious hunter that has imposed on the reality of the hunt itself. Now formerly oppressed communities produce this hip hop art out of the haze of newly won post-civil rights freedoms and force their way into American popular cult consciousness, preparing the country and world for more diverse and darker leadership. Some foolishly call this a tanning of America, while others work with a touch more nuance, if not accuracy, describing the process as one of positive multiculturalism. That's Jeff Chang's thing. In the end, however, their point is that hip hop paved the way for an improved world and in fact played a key role in getting President Obama elected. And I remember vividly, because I was as much as I could be in that heated argument in 07, 06. Bakari Kitwana, other hip hop scholars. And that's a whole other thing we got to come back to, that whole hip hop activist, hip hop scholar thing. I think I was in the right in that all the way through, in arguing that hip hop was not its own distinct political blah, 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 blah. It was a Black cultural expression that needed to be understood as such. And this idea that hip hop scholars and hip hop activists were some sort of distinct, it was just all too much. And I wonder, and I've been waiting for that book that Bakari was supposed to have written on how hip hop activism got over, and our disagreement to be published in it, or if not, for me to reveal what that and share it my own, so that I could be shown that I was right. But I don't think the book ever came out. I don't know, but anyway. But my point is that the role that hip hop was made to play in helping Obama get elected is the point I'm making here, that it was used to play the mythological, psychological warfare, propaganda, misrepresentation, symbolic, role of suggesting that Obama was this multicultural tanning of America, Black advance progress that hip hop has been meant to say is overall said to be, playing the role for Black people in macro. And I'm saying that was not the case. And that's why, shout out to Free Speech Radio News. At one point in an interview, they dubbed me the first hip hop presidential candidate because I was running for the Green Party nomination before happily stepping back to support Cynthia McKinney and Rosa Clemente, which was the right ticket to support. But the point is, initially, that's what I was trying to say. Hip hop is more radical than this commercial form. And if you listen to the stuff I'm listening to, you vote for the Green Party, you vote for me, you do something else with the vote. We would, and we would have some more fun with it. But no, hip hop was turned against us, turned against the people, and used in this commercial form to support Obama and a neoliberalizing of politics and now, whether I was right to be doing that within the Green Party is a whole other discussion or debate, and I'm happy to get to that another point too. But the point is, I was trying to do something decidedly different here. Same thing here. Without belaboring the point here, as I and others have done for so long now, suffice it to say that this narrative is absurd. Oh, right here, because to quote the one most recent mainstream dominant narrative hip hop historian Dan Charnas, hip hop is an American capitalist success story. And yeah, from their point of view, it is. And I'm saying that narrative is absurd. The so-called hip hop nation, which I kept saying was a mistake. I never liked that phrase. And I said, if it's going to be described as a nation, you have to recognize it's a colonized one. As I said here, it's at best a disorganized and colonized one, incapable at present of producing its own leadership or controlling its own resources or the wealth they produce. Black and brown communities continue to suffer record levels of incarceration, deportation, police brutality, and underemployment, and widening gaps in income and wealth. The closest effort to perhaps address these concerns, the 2004 National Hip Hop Political Convention, failed to solidify any particular ideology or political strategy to address real concerns which participants there were well aware. I stood in that convention and was furious, even at the late, great Amiri Baraka, for telling us we had to unify and support John Kerry in that year's election. Hell no. Hell no, that was wrong. We should have been forming that as a convention into its own political party or its own political bloc with its own candidates. That was always my argument. But I didn't realize all the forces that were involved in that have now risen to other levels of prominence elsewhere and have kept us largely in the same place. But again, and then, of course, Barack Obama is the most heavily Wall Street funded corporate Democrat ever, was no culmination of a revolutionary political movement. It has, since his election, simply increased the country's war efforts, deported more Latinos than ever, presided over an increasing police state, further internationalized drone warfare, and weakened African sovereignty through AFRICOM. Who wants credit for that? Exactly. All right, but because I know I want to make sure I'm ready for Dr. Burroughs. Let me move ahead just a little bit here. The link is to this piece is in the for you to all to review, is in the description. I'm happy to have you, but my point specifically about C. Delores Tucker is really revealed in the way she's described in the examples that I provide here. Tucker's prescience is not rewarded even posthumously. A tendency to see freedom and power where little exists continues to confuse interpretations of Tucker's arguments and to conflate perceived personal failings with political inaccuracy. Tucker's prescience is not rewarded even posthumously. Instead, her legacy continues to suffer omission or mangled inclusion within a dominant hip-hop historical narrative that claims what we see today is as largely a success story. One reason for this is the imperfect person Tucker was. And I already read that section earlier. She was imperfect. The pantheon of hip-hop journalism and scholarship have dismissed her along these lines. In the June 1994 issue of The Source magazine, which itself should be looked at critically, we got to look more carefully at that too. Its central role, its founders, again, the white boy Harvard foundations of it. I mean, there's so many commercial, non-black, non-African, non-revolutionary, and I say that with all my own biological contradictions understood. I'm clear on all that. As I said it with Raylina and Allison, it's not me who's not clear. All right, it's this monoracial world that has been forcibly uncleared. All right, but the whole narrative of hip hop has been dominated by communities that are not producing the art, that are not black, that are not brown, that are not poor, that are not radical, that are not and have dominated the stories that were told then and how it's reflected upon to this day. So if you go back and look at the And It Don't Stop anthology, the best American hip hop journalism of the last 25 years, hip hop's first and most prominent, of course, white founded, run and owned periodical, dismissively described Tucker as one who fancies herself as a type of modern day Moses, crusading against this horrific, monstrous thing, making public appearances, marching, picketing, getting arrested and crying. Tucker was further diminished in a piece by Kieran Mayo as being more interested in corporate conspiracy theories. Look at that. She dismissed it as a conspiracy theory. Find me any major rapper today who owns his or her own art, who is not distributed on a commercial corporate entity, who is itself not owned by an international conglomerate, or who is not even specifically owned or controlled by Lucien Grange, an 80-year-old white man in France, who is consistently, as the head of UMG, a Universal Music Group, considered the most powerful man in the music industry, or who Leor Cohen, who runs YouTube's music, the most used or the biggest distribution network today. Tell me how that's a conspiracy theory. Again, that's what Mayo was saying back in the day. All right, this is in the early 90s. But my point is that foundation is what continues to produce the frame through which Tucker and the argument that she and others, and to an extent I am making, is viewed. Unfortunately, Tucker's as yet unpublished memoir that this author has seen and has a copy of exposed that particular myth. I don't ever know what happened to the memoir. I'm not even sure if her widow is still alive. I don't know if he ever got it published. At the time, Peter Bailey, the great Malcolm X scholar, was putting me in touch with Tucker's widow, and initially this was going to be written for that, and I don't know if he would have even wanted that. But because I don't know if my version of his late wife would have been good enough for that. But if you read which I did, and I have it somewhere, the memoir, again, it's her version, obviously, but it's very different from this. And as I'm going to show you, they didn't get it right with what is on the public record. Anyway. But my point here is that Tucker was willing to meet with particular MCs, and was at one point attempting to create a record label that would promote a more conscious form of the art. Now, by the way, that particular point was used in this Twitter exchange that again, some anonymous person, same person who keeps commenting, critiquing. By the way, they were saying these anonymous people keep critiquing. Well, in this case, was criticizing my point here, and said, and actually used in their argument without, because clearly they didn't read what I had written here, that well, how could Tucker be a critic of the corporate world if she was going to try to create a label? So she was just trying to make money herself. No, but the point was she was sitting down with Suge Knight, trying to sit down with Suge and others to create a label that would promote a more conscious form of the art. She was trying to create something that would have been a challenge to the existing commercial ownership. Now, again, I don't know to what extent that is maybe true. I don't know to what extent it would have been successful. But what my point is, the fact that is what she was trying to do is not considered, or the fact that she said that that's what she was trying to do is not considered, even to be dismissed in the arguments of people that have made or have built a narrative that is at least built on or partially based on this woman being part of an anti-rap, old guard assault on Black youth and hip hop. Further, almost as if to perfectly foreshadow my current argument, Mayo accuses Tucker of inappropriately addressing larger structural issues like white supremacy that plagues every American institution in favor of targeting rap music. However, Tucker's assault on corporations, which are, of course, white supremacy organized, and their ability to distort via contracts and promotion the very hip-hop that Mayo claimed she was defending, demonstrates the kind of confused anti-institutional analysis that so many continue to this day. Further, Mayo goes on to defend rap's lyrical content by citing Nelson George's comments about the need to understand those lyrics as a subset of an outside framework of forces that influence it. In other words, to defend all the use of the N-word or bad language, this was part of the argument that was developed. Whereas my inferences would have been the commercial takeover of rap music is what has proliferated and encouraged an advancing use of the N-word. Again, some of us maybe remember there was a time where you might walk by a Black person, be, what's up, my nigga? And they would turn around and say, why I gotta be a nigga today? We forget that there are whole movements about New African and African. We forget that there are whole movements to remove Black people from this country for making self-references as African or king or queen. So we're erasing these histories as if the language Black youth are using is somehow natural or innate or a radical reappropriation. No, it's an imposed response, or it's an encouraged response to an imposed situation where other forms of self-reference and identity formation are not encouraged. So the commercial world that Tucker's critics were ultimately defending was aligning and arraying itself to assure that radical positive self-reference by Black people would never occur, at least popularly. So we remember the movements, even in video, of taking off the gold chains and putting on Africa medallions. Many of us grew up putting on those very Africa medallions. Many of our own radical political consciousness is in part formed by that early hip hop push, where just aesthetically, I mean, I still have a whole, hold on. Oh, I don't even have all of them, but I have some of them. Some of this is like a Nasir Jules, shout out to him. But you know, the fists, the Africa medallions, like this was, and I have more. I actually didn't plan for that. I should have prepared. There's more in there somewhere. But my point is, I still even have some of this stuff. The red, gold, and green Africa medallion, all of that stuff. There was a movement in the corporate world that took over hip hop in the mid '90s, largely due to the Telecom Act. Again, thanks to the Clintons, allowing for consolidation of media and all this other stuff. They projected what would become the bling and all the other stuff. They promoted all of that and took us from Fight the Power being number one in '89 to Gin and Juice being number one in '92 on a label formerly owned by Seagram's Gin. That's not Black youth doing that. Anyway, however, and somehow in Mayo's conception, one that still pervades the imposed narrative of hip hop's history, corporations are either not white supremacists or not part of this influential framework. So that's what I'm saying. Like, how do we call it a corporate conspiracy, or and not recognize that corporations are themselves white supremacy organized to work in anonymity, in self-protected anonymity, legally speaking? Worse still, Mayo references the often and still misplaced commentary of Michael Eric Dyson, who again routinely, as usual, pick one, misses the point in favor of a more simple one geared for applause rather than substance, and demonstrates another pillar of this absurd narrative that Tucker's response is born of her being an embarrassed, being part of an embarrassed by rap music Black bourgeois culture, as she was described by Dyson. I'm gonna come back to that too in just a second here. So this is where, and again, this is where Jeff Chang in his Can't Stop, Won't Stop, the mixtape of which, and he graciously allowed me to use it. So shout out to Jeff for that. But is amazing. The mixtape, I even just used it this semester. That was accompanied this. That is on iMixWhatILike.org. He gave me permission to give it away for free, just to use it. So it's there. You can check it out. It's one of the best mixtapes ever. And it's one of the best summaries of hip hop history in its dominant narrative form that you can use, especially if you want to give someone an introduction that you can then jump off from to do a lot of the work that we're trying to do here. But this part of the book, and what he does in this part of the book is wildly flawed. And again, part of what the book is, I think, designed to do, and why it was well funded in advance of its authorship, and why it's been so promoted subsequently as the canonical text, is because it paints a narrative that this country once painted, that you go from horror to potential power just through art. There's no political struggle. There's no revolution. There's no need for anything like that. You can just keep artistically tanning America. Again, and somehow an institutional analysis that properly places corporations at the center of a process by which Black expression is distorted and turned against itself, a process long in play in this country and around the world, is itself defined by this foolish narrative as being anti-hip-hop, anti-Black youth, and simply bougie. And for his part, the author of what was has widely been considered the definitive book on hip-hop history, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, Jeff Chang extended this faulty notion of a generational divide and culture gap to dismiss Tucker's approach as at best anachronistic and ill-intentioned. Chang, in just a few short pages, pits Tucker against a younger activist and describes her as a fading Black Pennsylvania politician who by 1966 had been singled out as one of Philadelphia's worst slumlords and simply seeking the civil rights limelight. Now, I don't know Philadelphia's history, and I don't know her history as slumlords. I mean, I don't know Philadelphia's history, particularly in terms of its, real estate community. Is she really? Was she really then? Would she really have been in Philadelphia the worst slumlord? Come on. I mean, I find that interesting, but anyway. Chang goes on to acknowledge that Tucker had been extending the same critique that hip-hop feminists had been leveling at media monopolies and rap misogynists for years. Interesting. But there was something disingenuous and opportunistic about her attack. See, this is slick. So he's acknowledging that other women in particular have been making the same argument. Corporations are making our art anti-woman, anti-Black. But somehow Tucker's is disingenuous. So again, he's not addressing anymore the substance of her argument. He's attacking her, the messenger. That is essential because the narrative can't be damaged. So that's why, again, the person on Twitter was saying, I'm not even going to read your piece clearly, but your argument is wrong just because you're using Tucker to make it. And I'm saying that's the point. I'm using Tucker because Tucker is being misused by people who are no more politically radical than she to present a more falsely radical narrative. This is not a defense of Tucker, and maybe that's why I never heard back from her widow. I don't know. Maybe that is why, but it's not a defense of Tucker. It's a defense. It's really an attack of the narrative. Anyway, one might find it odd that Tucker is dismissed as an opportunist or that this characterization is not at all detailed or supported with evidence from Chang, nor applied to anyone to establish a standard for who exactly is not an opportunist. Like how we define opportunism. Is it opportunistic to get a six-figure advance to write the definitive book on hip-hop history that tells a false narrative? I don't know. But I'm not calling him opportunistic. Rather, curiously and even more oddly, Chang offers as evidence only that Tucker allied herself with and was indeed, according to Chang, enormously helpful to white culture conservatives, and that Tucker was working with cult cons by mobilizing fresh troops for further attacks on use of color. But then we're still to support his claim while also ignoring the point previously raised that somehow powerful corporations run by elite white old men are not somehow white culture conservatives. Chang irresponsibly truncates Tucker's public testimony on the subject to support his distorted and poorly framed perspective on her work. Describing the following as evidence, Tucker's broadening of the war on youth, he quotes the following from Tucker's Senate testimony of 1994, which I've linked here. He titles it Broadening the War on Youth. But she says, as we have seen in the last 30 years, increasing law enforcement and correctional facilities have not reduced crime. These short-term fixes will do nothing to improve the lives of children like that were recently removed from a home in Chicago because of parental neglect and abuse. They are prime examples of the children that gangster rap will influence. Because of the lack of positive influences, their minds will be fertile and receptive ground for internalizing the violence glorified in gangster rap. Children such as these, our most neglected population, will become a social time bomb in our midst, being coaxed by gangster rap, they will trigger a crime wave of epidemic proportions that we have never seen the likes of. Regardless of the number of jails built, it will not be enough. Neither will there be enough police or government programs to contain the explosion of crime. We as a nation must act now. We must act decisively. That's quoting her in Chang's book. It should be noted from the outset that nowhere in this excerpt is Tucker calling for a broadening war on youth as Chang claims. Instead, taken in context, Tucker was attempting a defense or protection for Black youth. Further, and in direct contradiction to the description of her work by Mayo and later Chang, Tucker explains clearly that her target is not the general creativity of Black youth, but the misshapen and politically damaging corporate form. The following unquoted excerpt from the same Senate testimony is clear. For the record, she says, I wish to state that the NPCBW, her organization, is not against rap. It is not against hip hop. To the contrary, we support and encourage the artistic creativity of our young people. We love our young people. However, we are against gangster rap and misogynistic lyrics. Some $780 million worth of rap records were sold in 1993, with more than half of the purchases being under the age of 17, and 50% of these minors were being between the ages of 10 and 14 years old. Something must be done. It is our moral responsibility to halt the sale of not just gangster rap, but porno rap. Further, and quite in line with an entire history of media criticism whose focus has been and continues to be the deleterious impact media can have on young people, particularly the youth of oppressed colonized communities, Tucker continued. Also, again, I'm going to add, unquoted by Chang. As an illustration of this, let me share with you excerpts from a letter that I received from a prisoner in Lorton, Virginia. He said, rappers make it sound so good and look so real that I would drink and smoke drugs just like on the video, thinking that was the only way I could be somebody. My hood girls became hoes and bitches. What is so bad about it is they accepted it. You know why? Because they put themselves in the video. 2, and the guns, money, cars, drugs, and men became a reality. Look where this kind of thinking got me, facing 25 years to life in jail. Racism and greed are the sustaining forces behind gangster rap. It is no coincidence that the characters displaying the most indecent behavior for all the public to see are African Americans. Some argue that these artists are merely speaking frankly about their reality and the Black culture experience. But as Dr. Benjamin Hooks, former executive director of NAACP, noted, our cultural experience does not include debasing our women, glorification of violence, and the promotion of deviant sexual behavior. And again, in the poorly interpreted and unquoted subsequent portion of her statement, Tucker clearly distances herself certainly from some certainly white conservative position that calls for increased policing and imprisonment of Black youth. Tucker clearly shows hers to be a pragmatic liberal attempt to stem a ravaging outcomes of already hyper-policed and carceral experience of Black people. Tucker continued, finally, the solutions that I am suggesting today require that we rethink in terms of curtailing crime at its earliest stages by investing in our youth. As a weapon to combat today's violence, Congress needs to establish public-private partnerships which create live-in schools patterned after the Milton Hershey schools in Hershey, Pennsylvania, the Stephen Girard's College in Philadelphia, and Father Flanagan's Boys Town in the Midwest. I don't know about all that, man. Anyway, these facilities provide a wholesome and educational environment free of violence and cheaper than jails. In addition, since the government is in the process of downsizing the military, Congress should now examine the idea of converting military bases into training academies for first and second time youth offenders. Is she actually talking about drawing down the military budget and redistributing that overblown military budget? Wow. These bases could be put to good use by giving youth the skills they need to be productive citizens, rather than jailing and condemning them to a life of crime. In closing, I wish to remind the Senate that banning the sale of gangster rap to our children is one preventive action Congress can take to curb violence, but it is one that is imperative to begin the process of healing our nation. No one, and I say no one in no industry, should be allowed to continue the social and psychological poisoning of the young minds of this nation that is occurring with gangster rap. So I say to you again, with the record industry, that the record industry is out of control, and if they don't clean up their own act, they must be regulated. May I finally say this word? Coming here to this hearing today, I prayed first, and I got in the elevator, and I heard these words. I believe the children are the future, Whitney Houston said. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them the sense of pride. Our children need heroes. They need someone to look up to. Again, not revolutionary, but it is certainly not, as has been described by Jeff Chang and so many others in Michael Eric Dyson as well, who seem to always ignore or not have read or paid attention to her full statement and never quote them. Finally here, I'm not going to, I'll wrap here, but Charnas does more or less the same thing and comes back to quote, Tucker's truncated statements and Michael Eric Dyson's comments where he says again and foolishly Michael Eric Dyson, well, I'm saying again and foolishly Michael Eric Dyson's comments are returned by Charnas to prominence by Charnas, who first claims Tucker was an anti-rap activist and that Dyson got a standing ovation, see, just like I said, for his description of Tucker and those like her as petty bourgeois Negro intellectuals. So, in other words, Dyson, Charnas, Chang, and others condemn C. Delores Tucker as black bourgeoisie, as being the petty bourgeoisie, as being out of touch, being anti-rap, anti-black youth, and end up all supporting the very apparatus and process that has continued to destroy rap music, the commercial form of rap music, and project an even more hostile version onto black youth, and to whether people make the one-to-one connection or not. Tucker's conclusions are right. More black people youth in particular have gotten locked up, and would be absolutely foolish, particularly as anyone who studies media or just pays attention, to suggest that youth are not impacted by the messaging they get in pop culture. And it would be disingenuous for any of us to not remember our own youth and our own influence, even as simple as me going and getting a black and red silk Adidas sweatsuit so I could try to look like Run DMC. I mean, I've said before, did I, come to drink Hennessy because it was in rap music so much? I mean, I don't know. Don't drink it anymore. I've moved on, but I'm just saying, recently, by the way, but I'm just saying, so anyway, the idea that young people wouldn't be influenced by the behavior they see by pop culture figures whose fame solely is the result of a selection process run and dominated by the most elite, conservative, and international conglomerate consolidated corporations. I mean, consolidated in ownership of the industry corporations. So anyway, again, I just wanted to go through some of that because, again, a couple times this past week, I've seen this story get misrepresented again, or my argument get misrepresented again, and I just wanted to take a chance to lay it out. And since we didn't have a remix morning show this morning, it felt perfect a time to do it. So I appreciate you all coming through and checking that out. If there are any questions that I've missed, I'm going to come back. I'm going to look through very quickly before we get to Dr. Burroughs, or please restate them. So, but again, Michael Holt, this is what I'm saying is part of the false narrative. She did talk to the hip hop community. She was talking to Pac. She was talking to Suge Knight. She was talking to whoever. She was. She intended to have a meeting with Pac even after he said, what did he call her in one of those lyrics? He said something. So I'm saying she was. This is part of the false narrative that was created about her. Again, and I'm not saying she's a radical. I'm not saying she's a revolutionary. I'm not saying was a part of the petty bourgeoisie. I'm saying her argument about corporate takeover and influence was absolutely correct and has been ignored by those who want to support this false narrative that hip hop has more or less done what a political revolution couldn't. And I would argue that BET was never black owned. Just FYI, John Malone put up 500,000 to Bob Johnson's 15,000. I don't care whose name goes on the masthead after that. Anyway, please do hit the like button, the share button, the subscribe button. Add some comments if you've seen this now or later, and join the channel if you can. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.